Earth's Deathworlders responded to the SOS, not with mercy. The emergency beacon pierced through the cosmic static like a blade through silk. Communication specialist Harper Harada had been monitoring deep space frequencies for 18 months aboard the orbital listening post Cerberus station, but she'd never heard anything like this. The signal was weak, fragmented, arriving from a system so distant that the light from its star was older than human civilization. But the voice behind the static was unmistakably terrified. "This is Harmony Colony, Proxima Ventari system. They came from nowhere. Our shields gone. Children, please. Anyone listening? We're dying." The transmission dissolved into screams before cutting to silence. Harper's hands trembled as she reached for the emergency communication panel. She'd heard distress calls before. Mining accidents, ship failures, pirates. This was different. The raw terror in that voice spoke of something far worse than equipment failure or ordinary raiders. "Control, this is Deep Space Monitor 7, she spoke into her headset. "I have a priority alpha distress signal from the Proxima Ventari system, requesting immediate patch to Admiral Command." "Copy that, Monitor 7. Patching you through to Admiral Cross now." The screen flickered to life, revealing the weathered face of Admiral Tobias Cross. At 62, he'd commanded Earth's Deep Space Defense Force for 8 years, and his steel-gray eyes had seen every kind of crisis the galaxy could throw at humanity. But when he heard Harper's recording, something cold settled in his expression. "How old is this signal, specialist?" 14 hours, sir. Travel time from Proxima Ventari puts the actual event at approximately 6 days ago." Cross closed his eyes briefly. 6 days. Whatever was happening to those colonists, it had been happening for nearly a week. "Any response to our acknowledgement signals?" "Nothing, Admiral. Dead silence." "What do we know about Harmony Colony?" "Agricultural settlement established 12 years ago. Population approximately 8,000. Mixed families, mostly farmers, scientists, teachers. They export hybrid grains to 3 sectors. No military presence, no significant defensive capabilities." Admiral Cross leaned back in his chair. Harmony Colony was one of the peaceful settlements humanity had established in the outer territories. Good people trying to build something beautiful on the edge of known space. Exactly the kind of target that attracted the worst predators the galaxy had to offer. "Sir," Harper's voice was careful, "I've been analyzing the background radiation in the transmission. The energy signatures suggest Devaki raiders." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Every spacer knew about the Devaki. They were the nightmare that kept colony administrators awake at night. A nomadic fleet of marauders who swept through undefended systems like a plague. They didn't just raid, they consumed. Entire worlds had vanished under their onslaught, populations either enslaved or simply gone. "Patch me through to General Romano," Cross ordered, "and get me Captain Reese on the Valkyrie. If the Devaki have hit Harmony Colony, those people need help now." 20 minutes later, Admiral Cross stood in the briefing room aboard the Dreadnought Titan's Wrath, Earth's most advanced warship. Around the holographic table, the finest military minds in human space studied the tactical display. General Lucia Romano, Earth's top strategic commander, manipulated the star chart with practiced efficiency. "Proxima Ventari is 37 light years from our nearest base. If we push the fleet hard, we can make the jump in 18 hours. Captain Devin Reese, commander of the stealth corvette Valkyrie, shook his head grimly. "Admiral, 18 hours might as well be 18 days. If the Devaki are following their usual pattern, there won't be anyone left to rescue." "Then we don't go to rescue," Cross said quietly. "We go to make sure this never happens again." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Everyone present understood what the Admiral was suggesting. The Devaki had terrorized the outer colonies for over a century. They'd grown bold, believing themselves untouchable in the vast emptiness between stars. Perhaps it was time they learned what happened when they threatened human families. Captain Nix Morney, the youngest officer present at 34, commanded the heavy cruiser Nemesis. She'd grown up on a frontier colony herself, and her voice carried the hard edge of someone who'd seen what raiders could do to peaceful settlements. "What's our rules of engagement, sir?" Admiral Cross walked to the viewing port, looking out at the stars that held both infinite possibility and infinite dangers. The Devaki have made their choice. They've chosen to prey on innocent people. They've chosen to turn children into commodities. They've chosen to make themselves monsters. He turned back to face his officers. We're going to show them what happens when monsters encounter apex predators. The human fleet assembled in 3 hours. 7 ships, the dreadnought Titan's Wrath, 2 heavy cruisers, Nemesis and Retribution, the assault carrier Cerberus, 2 destroyers Phoenix and Shadowhawk, and Captain Reese's stealth corvette Valkyrie. Aboard the Cerberus, Colonel Rio Kawai briefed his Marines. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were Earth's finest, veterans of a dozen conflicts across human space. They'd signed up to protect human colonies from pirates, hostile aliens, and the 1,000 dangers of deep space. Today they would do exactly that. Listen up. Kawai's voice carried clearly through the hangar bay where 2,000 Marines checked their equipment. Intelligence suggests we're looking at a Devaki harvesting fleet. For those of you who haven't encountered them before, the Devaki are slavers, raiders, and worse. They don't take prisoners for ransom, they take them for profit. Staff Sergeant Riley Chen, a decorated veteran of the Outer Rim conflicts, raised her hand. Sir, what about survivors? Protocol for non-combatant evacuation? First priority is always saving lives, Sergeant. But remember, the Devaki don't leave survivors. If there are any colonists still alive, they're being kept alive for a reason, and that reason isn't mercy. The colonel paused, looking out at the faces of men and women who'd volunteered to put themselves between humanity and the darkness. The Devaki have never faced humans before. They think we're just another soft species from a low-gravity world. They're about to learn what growing up on a death world actually means. The fleet jumped to hyperspace in perfect formation, 7 ships carrying Earth's response to a cry for help that had traveled 37 light-years. Behind them, emergency protocols activated across human space. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was humanity's introduction to a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to face a species that evolved alongside apex predators. 14 hours later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima Ventari system. What they found there would be burned into their memories forever. Harmony Colony's planet hung in space like a wounded animal. The world that should have been green and gold with vast agricultural fields was covered in smoke and the angry red glow of uncontrolled fires. 3 massive Devaki ships, each one larger than anything in the human fleet, orbited the planet like carrion birds. But it was the smaller craft that made Admiral Cross's blood turn to ice. Dozens of Devaki shuttles were moving between the planet and the motherships, loaded with cargo that sensors identified as human life signs. "Report!" Cross ordered, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. Lieutenant Commander Ash Novak ran the sensor sweeps from the Titan's Wrath's bridge. 3 Devaki dreadnoughts, Admiral, at least 40 support vessels. They're loading human captives into processing ships. Any response from the colony? Nothing on military frequencies, sir, but I'm picking up scattered civilian transmissions. They're hiding in underground shelters, bunkers, anywhere they can find. How many? Novak's voice was barely above a whisper. Maybe 2,000, sir, out of 8,000? The bridge fell silent. 6,000 people, gone. Families that had traveled across the galaxy to build new lives. Children who'd never see another sunrise. Teachers and farmers and engineers who'd committed no crime except being born human on a world too far from Earth's protection. Open a channel to the Devaki fleet, Cross ordered. The main screen flickered, and humanity got its first look at the creatures that had been terrorizing the galaxy for over a century. The Devaki were tall, gaunt beings with pale gray skin stretched tight over elongated skulls. Their eyes were black pits that seemed to absorb light, and when the fleet commander spoke, his voice was like grinding metal. Unknown vessels, you intrude in Devaki claimed territory, withdraw immediately or face harvesting. This is Admiral Cross of the Terran Defense Fleet. Cross replied calmly. You are attacking a human colony. Withdraw your forces and release all captives immediately. The Devaki commander, his name appeared on the translation matrix as Fleet Master Vorthak, actually laughed. It was a sound like breaking bones. Terran, another unknown species comes to die uselessly. Your colonists are already processed. Their genetic material will serve the Devaki fleet for generations. Cross felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Processed? Their children will serve as workers. Their adults as biological components. Their genetic diversity will strengthen our breeding programs. Vorthak's lipless mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. You should be honored. Your species will contribute to Devaki expansion across this sector. I see. Cross's voice remained steady. And if we refuse to withdraw, then you will join them. The Devaki have harvested 300 species across 2,000 systems. Your deaths will change nothing. The transmission ended, leaving the human fleet in stunned silence. Around the bridge, officers stared at their screens with expressions of barely controlled rage. These weren't raiders or pirates. These were something far worse. Industrial-scale predators who viewed entire species as resources to be consumed. Captain Morney's voice crackled over the comm system. Admiral, I have weapon locks on all 3 dreadnoughts. Request permission to engage. Cross looked around the bridge at his crew. These were good people, civilized people who believed in law and order and the fundamental dignity of sentient life. They'd come here to rescue colonists and found something that challenged everything they believed about the nature of intelligent species. All ships, this is Admiral Cross. The Devaki have made their position clear. They view human beings as biological resources to be harvested. They process children like raw materials. They've just told us they intend to do the same to every human world they encounter. Cross walked to the center of the bridge, his voice carrying to every ship in the fleet. We came here to rescue colonists. We found monsters. The question now is simple. Do we show these creatures the mercy they've shown to 8,000 innocent people? The response came simultaneously from every ship in the fleet. No, sir. Then let's remind the galaxy what happens when you threaten human children. Cross turned to his weapons officer. All ships, free fire. No survivors. Show them what apex predators do to pack hunters. The human fleet spread out in perfect formation and opened fire. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an education. The Devaki had grown comfortable in their role as the galaxy's apex predators. They commanded massive ships, had superior numbers, and possessed technology refined over centuries of warfare. What they didn't have was experience fighting creatures from a death world. The Devaki dreadnoughts were built for intimidation and overwhelming firepower. They were designed to crush resistance from agricultural colonies and peaceful trading worlds. They were not built to fight ships crewed by humans who'd learned warfare in the asteroid belts around Sol, who'd cut their teeth on conflicts where every advantage had to be earned in blood and vacuum. Captain Reese's Valkyrie struck first, using her stealth systems to get within knife-fighting range of the Devaki flagship. Her torpedo spread punched through the alien ship's shields like they were made of tissue paper. The resulting explosion lit up half the system. Target neutralized, Reese reported calmly, moving to secondary objectives. The Devaki fleet tried to respond, but their tactics were designed for genocide, not warfare. They expected their enemies to flee or die quickly. They'd never faced opponents who got more dangerous when cornered. Captain Morney's Nemesis and the Retribution bracketed the second dreadnought, pouring concentrated fire into its hull. The alien ship's armor was thick, designed to resist the desperate attacks of doomed colonists. It couldn't stand up to weapons designed by a species that had learned to kill planet crackers and stellar parasites. This is Nemesis, Morney reported. Target 2 is breaking up. Debris field expanding. The third Devaki dreadnought tried to run, abandoning its support fleet in a desperate attempt to escape. It made it exactly 14 minutes before the destroyers Phoenix and Shadowhawk ran it down. The death of the Devaki fleet command ship ended all organized resistance. Admiral Cross watched the smaller Devaki vessels surrendering or fleeing on his tactical display. The entire engagement had lasted 37 minutes. 3 dreadnoughts and 40 support vessels wiped out by 7 human ships without losing a single vessel. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Novak reported, "We're receiving surrender signals from the surviving Devaki ships. They're offering to negotiate." Are they now? Cross's voice was deceptively mild. Patch me through to the colony planet. Emergency frequencies. Static filled the comm channel. Then a voice emerged, human, terrified, but alive. This is Dr. Rachel Vance, Harmony Colony Medical Facility. Is someone there? Please, we've been hiding for 6 days. The things they did to our people. Dr. Vance, this is Admiral Cross of the Terran Defense Fleet. You're safe now. The Devaki fleet has been neutralized. We're sending down medical and recovery teams immediately. The sob that came through the channel was audible across the bridge. Thank you. Oh God, thank you. But Admiral, they took so many. The children, families, they loaded them onto ships. Cross closed his eyes. Dr. Vance, how many colonists are still planet-side? Maybe 1,500 in the underground shelters, but they took over 6,000. Men, women, children, they're gone. Admiral Cross opened his eyes and looked at the Devaki ship showing surrender flags on his tactical display. Not gone, Doctor. Stolen. There's a difference. He switched to fleet communications. Colonel Kawai, prepare your Marines for boarding operations. Captain Reese, I want detailed scans of every Devaki vessel. We're looking for human life signs. Sir, Captain Morney's voice carried a note of concern. The Devaki are signaling surrender. Galactic law requires us to accept... Galactic law, Cross interrupted, doesn't account for species that process children like industrial resources. The Devaki wanted to show us their true nature. Now we show them ours. The first boarding action took place on a Devaki processing ship. Colonel Kawai led the assault personally, bringing 2 companies of Earth's finest Marines aboard the alien vessel. What they found there would haunt their nightmares for years to come. The ship was a factory. Row upon row of cages held human prisoners sorted by age, gender, and genetic compatibility. Children were separated from parents, families broken apart according to some inhuman efficiency calculation. The youngest captives, barely old enough to walk, were being prepared for something the translation software couldn't adequately render in human language. Colonel, Staff Sergeant Chen's voice was tight with controlled fury, you need to see this. Kawai found his sergeant in what appeared to be a medical bay. The walls were lined with tanks filled with a viscous fluid, and floating in each tank was something that had once been human. The Devaki were harvesting organs, extracting genetic material, performing procedures that reduced human beings to component parts. How many? Kawai asked quietly. Sir, we've found over 300 prisoners on this ship alone, but the processing tanks, there might have been 1,000 more. Kawai keyed his radio. Admiral, this is Kawai. The Devaki weren't just taking slaves. They were breaking down humans for biological materials. We found the processing centers. Cross's response was immediate. Survivors? Over 300 on this ship, sir. Traumatized but alive. Medical teams are needed urgently. Understood, Colonel. Continue boarding operations. Every ship, every prisoner, every Devaki crew member. The boarding actions continued for 8 hours. Ship after ship revealed the same horrific truth. The Devaki didn't just conquer species, they consumed them. Humans were being reduced to genetic material, biological components, and forced labor. It was industrialized genocide, efficient and ruthless. But not efficient enough. When the final tally was completed, the human Marines had liberated over 2,000 colonists from the Devaki processing ships. They were alive, though the psychological scars would take years to heal. Admiral Cross stood in the medical bay of the Titan's Wrath, looking down at a young girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She'd been found in one of the children's processing areas, marked for procedures that Cross refused to think about too deeply. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. The girl looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Emma Rodriguez, are you here to take us home?" Cross knelt down beside her bed. "Yes, Emma, we're taking all of you home. You're safe now." "What about the bad things? The tall gray ones?" Cross looked through the medical bay's viewport at the debris field that had once been the Devaki fleet. The bad things won't hurt anyone ever again. Dr. Patricia Wells, the fleet's chief medical officer, approached Admiral Cross with her preliminary report. "Admiral, we've processed all the survivors. Physical injuries are relatively minor. The Devaki wanted their resources intact. But the psychological trauma, how bad? They knew what was going to happen to them. The Devaki didn't hide their intentions. Adults and children alike watched their families being processed. It's going to take years of therapy, maybe decades. Cross nodded grimly. Doctor, I want a full medical report on Devaki procedures. Everything they were doing, every technique they were using. I want the entire galaxy to know exactly what these creatures were. Sir, some of it's difficult to document. The methods they used, the systematic approach to breaking down human biology, it's going to be hard for people to read. Good, let it be hard. Let every species in the galaxy know what the Devaki really were. Let them know what we found here. The cleanup operations took another 3 days. The surviving Devaki crew members were processed through military tribunals, their crimes documented with methodical precision. What emerged was a pattern of systematic genocide spanning centuries and hundreds of worlds. The Devaki hadn't just been raiders, they'd been the galaxy's cancer, spreading from system to system, consuming entire species for biological resources. Worlds that had simply vanished from galactic records, their populations erased so completely that other species assumed they'd simply failed to thrive. Admiral Cross transmitted his after-action report to Earth on an encrypted channel. The response came back within hours, bearing the personal seal of President Angela Torres. Admiral Cross, you and your fleet have performed exceptionally under impossible circumstances. The discovery of systematic genocide on this scale requires an immediate response from the international community. You are authorized to proceed with Phase 2 operations. Phase 2 had been a theoretical contingency, something military planners had developed for the discovery of existential threats to human survival. It had never been implemented because humanity had never encountered anything that required it. Until now. All ships, this is Admiral Cross. We've received authorization from Earth Command for extended operations. Intelligence analysis of Devaki records indicates processing centers throughout this sector. Conservative estimates suggest over 50,000 humans from various colonies are currently held in Devaki facilities. The fleet channel was silent for a moment. Then Captain Reese's voice came through clearly. Admiral, what are our orders? We find every Devaki installation in this sector. We liberate every human prisoner, and we make sure this never happens to anyone, anywhere, ever again. The hunt began immediately. Using data extracted from Devaki computer systems, the human fleet mapped a network of processing stations, breeding facilities, and resource extraction centers spread across 12 star systems. Each facility held hundreds or thousands of prisoners from dozens of different species. Captain Morney's nemesis hit the first processing station in the Kepler 442 system. The facility was built into an asteroid, hidden from casual observation, but perfectly visible to human military sensors. The assault was swift and merciless. This is Morney to all ships. Kepler station is secure. We've liberated 800 prisoners from 17 different species. The Devaki garrison has been eliminated. Similar reports came in from across the sector as the human fleet systematically dismantled the Devaki infrastructure. Each facility revealed new horrors. Breeding programs designed to create optimal slave populations, medical experimentation that reduced sentient beings to laboratory subjects, industrial processes that turned living creatures into biological components. But they also revealed something else. The Devaki had been keeping detailed records, names, species, homeworlds, genetic profiles, a complete catalog of their victims spanning over 2 centuries. Dr. Wells worked around the clock analyzing the data. What she found painted a picture of genocide on a scale that challenged comprehension. Admiral, based on Devaki records, they've processed over 3 million sentient beings in the last 50 years alone. Entire species have been reduced to genetic samples. Any indication of home base operations? Central Command? Yes, sir. Something called the Core Nexus in the Vega Ulterior system. According to these files, it's their primary breeding facility and command center. Population estimates suggest, Admiral, there might be over 100,000 prisoners there. Cross studied the star charts on his command display. Vega Ulterior was deep in what galactic authorities had marked as unexplored space. Territory so dangerous that most species avoided it entirely. Now they knew why. It wasn't unexplored, it was Devaki. How heavily defended? The records indicate a permanent fleet of at least 20 dreadnoughts plus supporting vessels. It's their most important facility. Cross nodded slowly. 20 dreadnoughts was more than the human fleet could handle in direct confrontation. But humans had never been ones to fight fair when the stakes involved protecting innocent lives. Dr. Wells, I want you to compile everything we've learned about Devaki biology, technology, and tactics. Send it back to Earth on an encrypted burst transmission. If this goes wrong, Earth needs to know what's coming. Sir, are you planning to assault the core nexus? Cross looked at the medical reports from the liberated prisoners, the testimonies of systematic torture and genocide, the files documenting centuries of industrial-scale atrocities. Doctor, there are 100,000 people in that facility who are counting on someone to remember they exist. The galaxy has forgotten them. Their own species have written them off as lost. But we found them. Admiral, with respect, 20 dreadnoughts. We'll find out what happens when predators target pack hunters' families. Cross turned to his communications officer. Send a message to Earth, request immediate reinforcement from the Second Fleet. Authorization, Apex Protocol. The Apex Protocol was humanity's ultimate contingency. The authorization to use any and all military assets to neutralize existential threats to human survival. It had been created after the Colony Wars, when humanity realized they were sharing the galaxy with species that viewed them as prey rather than partners. The response from Earth came back in record time. Admiral Rebecca Santos would arrive with the Second Fleet within 72 hours, bringing humanity's newest and most advanced warships. The combined fleet would represent the largest concentration of human military power ever assembled. But Admiral Cross wasn't planning to wait for reinforcements. While Santos brought the heavy hammer, Cross would provide the surgical strike. Captain Reese, prepare your ship for deep penetration reconnaissance. I want detailed intelligence on the core nexus before the main fleet arrives. Sir, the Valkyrie is built for stealth, but a facility that size will have sensor nets we've never encountered before. Then we'll have to be very good at not being detected. The prisoners in that facility have been waiting for rescue for years, some for decades. We're not going to make them wait any longer. The Valkyrie slipped away from the main fleet under full stealth protocols, her hull configured to absorb sensor sweeps and electromagnetic radiation. Captain Reese had volunteered for the mission despite knowing it was likely one way. Getting intelligence on the core nexus was essential, but getting out alive would require considerable luck. The journey to Vega Ulterior took 36 hours at maximum stealth velocity. When the Valkyrie finally arrived at the edge of the system, what her sensors revealed defied comprehension. The core nexus wasn't built on a planet. It was a planet. The entire world had been converted into a massive processing facility, its surface covered with industrial complexes, breeding centers, and detention facilities. Orbital stations surrounded the planet like mechanical moons, each one larger than most space habitats. Jesus Christ, whispered Lieutenant Alex Harper, the Valkyrie's sensor operator. Sir, I'm reading life signs in the millions. Not just humans, dozens of species. Captain Reese studied the tactical display with growing horror. How many ships? 37 capital ships, sir, plus at least 100 smaller vessels. But Captain, some of these readings, I think they're mobile processing ships. They're moving prisoners between facilities in real time. Reese recorded everything, knowing that this intelligence would determine the fate of millions of sentient beings. The core nexus wasn't just a military target. It was an industrial genocide complex operating on a planetary scale. Captain, Harper's voice was tight with urgency, we're being scanned. Something's detected us. On the main screen, a Devaki patrol ship was moving toward their position, its sensors actively searching for the source of the anomalous readings. Reese had seconds to decide, run and preserve the intelligence, or fight and risk losing everything they learned. All hands, prepare for emergency acceleration. We're leaving now. The Valkyrie broke stealth and burned for the edge of the system at maximum velocity. Behind her, the Devaki patrol ship gave chase, transmitting warnings to the core nexus defense fleet. Reese had what she'd come for, but getting home with it would require surviving the next 6 hours of pursuit. The chase lasted 4 hours and covered 3 star systems before the Valkyrie finally lost her pursuers in the gravity well of a gas giant. By the time Captain Reese rendezvoused with Admiral Cross's fleet, the Second Fleet had arrived from Earth. Admiral Santos brought 12 dreadnoughts, 8 heavy cruisers, and 4 assault carriers packed with Marines. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, built around a single principle. Sometimes the only way to stop monsters is to show them something more dangerous. The combined briefing took place aboard Admiral Santos's flagship, the Leviathan. Around the holographic display, the finest military minds in human space studied the intelligence from the Core Nexus reconnaissance. 37 capital ships, General Romano noted. Plus orbital defenses and ground-based weapons. It's going to be a hard fight. The facility itself is the real challenge, Admiral Santos added. If we damage the processing centers during the assault, we could kill the people we're trying to save. Colonel Kawai had been studying the layout of the planetary facilities. Ma'am, my Marines can handle the ground operations, but we'll need time. The prisoners are scattered across hundreds of different facilities. Extraction is going to take hours, maybe days. Admiral Cross looked at the tactical projections, running combat scenarios in his head. The mathematics were simple but brutal. Humanity could win this fight, but the cost would be enormous. Ships would be lost, thousands of military personnel would die, and success wasn't guaranteed. There's another option, he said quietly. The room fell silent. Cross manipulated the holographic display, highlighting the Core Nexus's central command structure. The Devaki run their entire operation from a single planetary command center. All processing facilities, all breeding programs, all logistics, everything flows through this one installation. You're suggesting a decapitation strike, Admiral Santos realized. Take out the command structure and let the system collapse. More than that, we give the Devaki a choice. Surrender immediately and release all prisoners, or we demonstrate what happens when a Deathworld species decides something needs to stop existing. General Romano frowned. Admiral, that sounds dangerously close to threatening genocide. General, the Devaki have committed genocide against dozens of species over the past 2 centuries. They've processed millions of sentient beings like industrial raw materials. They've turned the systematic murder of children into a profit-making enterprise. Cross's voice remained calm, but something cold and implacable had entered his tone. We're not threatening genocide. We're offering them the chance to avoid the consequences of their own choices. The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. The human fleet would jump directly into the heart of the Vega ulterior system, demonstrating their ability to strike anywhere at any time. The Devaki would be given exactly one opportunity to surrender and release all prisoners. If they refused, humanity would show the galaxy what apex predators did to industrial-scale monsters. The combined fleet jumped to hyperspace in perfect formation. 19 capital ships, 12 assault carriers, and 37 support vessels, the largest single military force humanity had ever deployed. As they traveled through the twisted dimensions of hyperspace, Admiral Cross broadcast a message to every ship in the fleet. In 6 hours, we're going to face an enemy that views sentient life as a renewable resource. They've spent centuries perfecting the art of systematic genocide. They believe themselves untouchable because no species has ever been willing to do what's necessary to stop them. Cross paused, looking around the bridge of the Titan's wrath at officers who'd volunteered to risk everything for people they'd never met. Today they learn what humans do when someone hurts our pack. Today they learn why evolution made us apex predators. Today they learn that some species don't negotiate with monsters. They eliminate them. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vega ulterior system in perfect formation. Immediately, every sensor screen lit up with contact alerts as the Devaki defense fleet scrambled to respond to the unexpected intrusion. Admiral Cross opened a channel to the Core Nexus command center. The face that appeared on screen was even more gaunt and predatory than the previous Devaki commanders humanity had encountered. This was Fleet Admiral Kethvar, Supreme Commander of the Devaki war machine. Unknown vessels, you have entered Devaki core territory. Withdraw immediately or face total destruction. This is Admiral Cross of the Terran Defense Fleet. We know what you've been doing here. We know about the processing facilities, the breeding programs, the systematic genocide. We're here to offer you one chance to surrender. Kethvar's lipless mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. Terran, yes, we have extensive files on your species now. Your colonists provided excellent genetic material. Their offspring will serve the Devaki for generations. Cross felt the familiar cold anger settling in his chest. Fleet Admiral, you will immediately cease all processing operations and release every prisoner in your facilities. You will surrender your fleet and submit to war crimes tribunals. This is your only opportunity to avoid complete destruction. Complete destruction? Kethvar's laugh was like grinding metal. Small mammals, you face the might of the Devaki war fleet. 37 dreadnoughts, hundreds of support vessels, orbital defense platforms, and ground-based weapons that could shatter moons. You bring 19 ships and demand our surrender? Fleet Admiral, your people have been hunting easy prey for centuries. Agricultural colonies, peaceful traders, species that never learned to fight because they never had to. Cross's voice remained perfectly calm. You've never encountered a species from a death world. You've never fought predators who evolved alongside creatures that could crack planets and devour stars. Today, you learn the difference. Is this how your species negotiates, with threats and bluster? No, Cross replied. This is how we say goodbye. The transmission ended, and Admiral Cross turned to his fleet communications officer. All ships, execute Alpha Strike. Target their command vessels first, then the orbital platforms. Marines prepare for planetary assault operations. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration of what happened when an apex predator species decided something needed to stop existing. The human fleet spread out in a formation that maximized their firepower while minimizing their exposure to return fire. They'd learned from the previous engagements that Devaki tactics relied on overwhelming superiority and intimidation. Against opponents who fought harder when cornered, those tactics were worse than useless. Admiral Santos's Leviathan opened fire first, her massive weapons array targeting the Devaki flagship with concentrated plasma streams that turned the alien dreadnought's hull into molten metal. The explosion lit up half the system and sent debris cascading through the Devaki formation. "This is Leviathan," Santos reported calmly. "Primary target eliminated. Moving to secondary objectives." The Devaki fleet tried to respond, but their formations were designed for genocide, not warfare. They expected their enemies to break and run when faced with superior numbers. They'd never encountered opponents who got more dangerous when their families were threatened. Captain Morney's Nemesis and Admiral Cross's Titan's Wrath bracketed the core Nexus orbital stations, systematically destroying the weapons platforms that could threaten the prisoner facilities. Each explosion removed another layer of the defensive network that had protected the Devaki genocide machine for centuries. The planetary assault began before the space battle was finished. Colonel Kawai led the first wave of dropships through the atmosphere, his Marines equipped with detailed maps of every processing facility on the planet. They'd studied the intelligence for days, memorizing the locations of prisoner barracks, medical facilities, and command centers. "All teams, this is Kawai. Remember your priorities. Prisoners first, documentation second, Devaki personnel last. We're here to save lives, not count bodies." The first facility Staff Sergeant Chen hit was a children's processing center. What she found there made her understand why Admiral Cross had been willing to risk the Earth's Deathworlders conclusion. The first facility Staff Sergeant Chen hit was a children's processing center. What she found there made her understand why Admiral Cross had been willing to risk the entire fleet. Hundreds of young beings from dozens of species, sorted by age and genetic compatibility, awaiting procedures that would reduce them to biological components. The liberation of the core nexus took 18 hours. Facility by facility, the human Marines systematically dismantled the Devaki genocide machine. They found processing centers that had operated for decades, breeding programs designed to optimize slave populations, and medical facilities that treated sentient beings like laboratory subjects. By the time the last Devaki stronghold fell, the numbers were staggering. Over 200,000 prisoners from 43 different species, some held captive for over 20 years. The Devaki had turned systematic genocide into an industrial process, consuming entire civilizations for biological resources. The war crimes tribunals took place aboard the human fleet ships. The surviving Devaki leadership was processed through military courts with methodical precision. Their own records provided overwhelming evidence of crimes spanning centuries, detailed catalogs of murdered species, genetic profiles of processed populations, industrial reports treating sapient beings as renewable resources. Fleet Admiral Kethvar, brought before Admiral Cross in restraints, showed no remorse. You think this changes anything? The galaxy is vast. Others will take our place. The strong consume the weak. This is natural law. Cross studied the alien commander with cold eyes. You're right about one thing. Others might try to take your place. That's why we're making sure the galaxy remembers what happened here. The documentation was exhaustive. Every facility, every victim, every procedure, all of it recorded and transmitted to every known government in the galaxy. The Devaki records revealed the scale of their crimes with horrifying precision. 3 million sentient beings processed over the past 50 years, entire species reduced to genetic samples, worlds stripped of their population so completely that galactic authorities had assumed they'd simply failed to thrive. Dr. Wells compiled the final medical report, documenting procedures that had turned genocide into industrial efficiency. Admiral, this isn't just evidence of war crimes. It's proof that sapient species can become so specialized for predation that they lose all capacity for coexistence. The rescued prisoners began their journey home on human transport vessels. Some hadn't seen their homeworlds in decades. Others discovered that their species had been declared extinct while they suffered in Devaki facilities. For many, the human fleet represented their first contact with the outside galaxy in years of captivity. Young Emma Rodriguez, the 7-year-old girl Admiral Cross had spoken to in the medical bay, approached him before the transport to Earth departed. She carried a drawing she'd made, stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "Thank you for taking us home," she said simply. Cross knelt down to her level. "Thank you for being brave enough to survive until we could find you." The human fleet departed Vega Ulterior System after confirming the complete destruction of all Devaki processing facilities. Behind them, the core nexus burned, not with the fires of war, but with controlled demolitions that ensured the industrial genocide infrastructure could never be rebuilt. Admiral Cross transmitted his final report to Earth as the fleet began its journey home. The message was brief. Mission accomplished. Devaki threat neutralized. Genocide infrastructure destroyed. All prisoners recovered and en route to their homeworlds. The galaxy is safer today than it was yesterday. The response from President Torres came back within hours. "Admiral Cross, you and your fleet have performed beyond all expectations. Your actions have not only saved hundreds of thousands of lives, but established humanity's commitment to protecting the innocent throughout known space. Welcome home." But perhaps the most significant response came from an unexpected source. As the human fleet crossed into previously unexplored space, they began receiving transmissions from species they'd never encountered. Worlds that had hidden themselves for decades, afraid to reveal their existence while the Devaki prowled the galaxy. The message from the Cathara Collective was typical. "To the Terran Defense Fleet, we monitored your actions in the Vega Ulterior System. For 60 years, our people have lived in hidden enclaves, afraid to venture into open space while the Devaki consumed our neighbors. Today, for the first time in generations, our children ask when they can see the stars. Thank you for reminding the galaxy that some predators hunt monsters." Similar messages arrived from across the galaxy as news of the Devaki defeat spread. Species that had lived in fear for centuries were emerging from hiding. Trade routes that had been abandoned were reopening. Worlds that had armed themselves against genocide were beginning to disarm. The galaxy had learned that Earth's children were pack hunters. When someone threatened the pack responded with overwhelming force and absolute commitment. The Devaki had spent centuries believing themselves apex predators. They'd discovered that apex predators were something else entirely. Creatures that didn't just hunt for survival, but eliminated threats to ensure their pack could thrive. 6 months later, Admiral Cross stood in the Memorial Garden on Harmony Colony. The settlement had been rebuilt, its agricultural fields green and gold under the alien sun. A simple stone monument listed the names of the 6,000 colonists who had died in the Devaki attack. Families who had traveled across the galaxy to build new lives, only to encounter monsters who viewed them as resources. But beside that monument stood another, a larger structure listing the names of the 200,000 beings liberated from Devaki facilities. Children who would grow up free, adults who could return to their families, entire species that had been pulled back from extinction. Dr. Rachel Vance approached Admiral Cross as he stood before the memorials. She'd been the voice on the emergency transmission that started it all, a frightened colonist calling into the void for help that she never truly believed would come. Admiral, I wanted to thank you again. Not just for rescuing us, but for what you did afterward. Every person who's been freed from those facilities, their families, owe you everything. Cross shook his head. Dr. Vance, we didn't do anything special. We just responded to someone who asked for help. That's what makes it special, she replied. The galaxy is full of species that mind their own business, that don't get involved, that assume someone else will handle the problems. You heard a call for help from people you'd never met in a place you'd never been, and you came anyway. Cross looked out over the rebuilt colony where children played in gardens that had once been processing centers for an industrial genocide machine. Doctor, there's something you should know about humans. We're pack hunters. When someone threatens the pack, we don't negotiate. We don't compromise. We eliminate the threat. And who counts as the pack? Cross smiled, watching a group of children from different species playing together under the alien sky. Human kids alongside young Kithra, rescued Devaki prisoners alongside local colonists, all of them protected by the knowledge that somewhere out there, a fleet of human warships stood ready to respond to any cry for help. Anyone who needs protection, he said simply. Anyone who calls out into the dark asking for help. Anyone who refuses to give up hope that someone somewhere will remember they exist. The memorial garden was quiet except for the sound of children's laughter and the rustle of wind through grain fields that stretched to the horizon. Above them, the stars shone with the promise that the galaxy was a little safer, a little kinder, because sometimes monsters encountered something more dangerous than themselves. The galaxy had learned what happened when predators targeted pack hunters' families. The lesson would not be forgotten.